When can you use someone else's content legally? That's what we're going to talk about today. As a content creator, there are going to be times when you may want to use third-party intellectual property. For example, if you want to use music, or if you want to play a video game during a broadcast or on your video, you're going to need to have certain rights to do that. So what are the rights you need, or how can you get them? Or what are the circumstances in which you can use intellectual property without getting those rights? The most obvious example of a legal use of somebody else's intellectual property, that's always going to be a license, right? That's when you already have permission from the content creator or the owner to use their intellectual property in your work. So if you have a license, and as long as it's scoped properly, that is airtight. That is your armor. So you can always rely on a license. And sometimes licenses are secured on your behalf, especially if you're uploading content to a platform. Platforms sometimes secure public performance rights on behalf of their end users, so their end users can use that music on the platform. Another example of when you can legally use somebody else's content in yours is when that content is already in the public domain. That means that the original content creator or owner can no longer tell you not to use the work because their rights in it have expired. But it's not always easy to tell when something is squarely in the public domain, especially when there are layers of rights involved. So for example, even if a copyright has expired and the work is in the public domain, the trademark associated with the work may not be. And this is the very argument that Disney is trying to assert in Steamboat Willie right now, which is the source of some litigation. So public domain can still give rise to a suit if you aren't quite clear on what is and is not in the public domain. And like we said before, trademarks don't expire for as long as you're using them in commerce, so they can exist indefinitely. Another example of when you can legally use somebody else's content is if your use is so insignificant and small that it's what's called a de minimis use. And that means that your use is so minor, your use is so inconsequential, both in terms of what it represents in the new work and also how much of it you're actually using, that it doesn't really compete with the original owner's copyright. And in those cases, a court may go ahead and say, hey, they haven't used enough of it for it to really present a problem for you. This is just something that was incidentally caught in the background. Even if it was deliberately put there, so long as there's no special emphasis on it, it's usually okay. But if you're going to claim a de minimis use right, you should probably talk to an attorney first to find out if you're using too much to make that kind of claim. And especially if it's something that you build into your story or that comes into your work more fully, that's not a time when you can claim de minimis use. So this is one you have to be careful about. One of the more contentious ways you can get somebody else's content in yours is through the concept of fair use. But I say tread with care on this one, and that's because fair use is a lot more complicated than people give it credit for. You may often hear things like transformative use or parody, but here's the thing. Those aren't really how courts decide whether something is fair use or not. They apply a four-factor test. And this is another time when you'll probably want to talk to an attorney before you try to claim something is fair use. And that's because these four factors operate on a sliding scale. So just making sure that you comply with one does not guarantee that it will be considered fair use. All four factors will be considered in the decision, and you really need a coherent legal analysis to determine whether or not something is fair use. So as I mentioned before, the safest way to ensure that you can legally use somebody else's content in yours is to make sure that there's a valid license in place. Whether it's one that you get yourself or whether it's something that a platform gets for you, you need to make sure that you have the actual rights to use the content in the way that you want to use it. That's it. I hope this is useful for you. Have a great night.